don't just buy because wine is cheap. When a wine is sold on the basis of cheap, that's not the wine you want to drink.
Hi, everybody. You're listening to Dirty Linen, and my name is Dani Valent. I am thrilled to be with you for a chat about food and drink and all the good things, gathering in community around big topics and, small moments. Today, we are chatting to Liinaa Berry. She's a wine expert, a writer, a sommelier, and a keen watcher of not just the wine world, not just the hospitality world, but all the many strands that link drinkers and eaters, i.e. all of us, to land and soil and system. I was looked after by Liinaa at Ides, RIP, a little restaurant in Melbourne, sitting up at the bar for steak night while she shared a couple of wines that didn't just taste great, they were there for a reason. Liinaa asks not just how something tastes, but why it matters. Liinaa, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Thank you, Dani. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I have worked hospitality for 20 years, and whatever role you can possibly imagine in hospitality, I've done, except working in the kitchen, from dishwasher to wine director. So I guess with all the experience that I've accumulated and the venues that I've worked with, the chef and the people and the wines, I have left full-time hospitality 2 years ago. And when I left the floor, what the first thing it actually gave me, it sort of kind of reclaimed a little bit my life, because it was 5 nights a week, 70 hours a week. I really, when you're constantly responding to what's in front of you, service, guests, bottles, problems, you don't really actually have the luxury of stepping back and really asking the bigger questions. So for the first time in years, a couple of years ago, I started asking myself, not just how to talk about wine, but why actually wine mattered in the first place. So from this point onwards, there was also, as you know, there's been we're going through a time when alcohol consumption is being questioned, or there's a declining consumption of wine. People are wine is increasingly seen as either an expensive luxury product, or it's kind of losing a little bit its relevance. I don't know. But then I thought to myself, look, wine has survived 8,000 years during the Neolithic times. At the beginning of settled agriculture, wine has traveled through migration, through trade, religion, empire, celebration. It has shaped landscapes. It has shaped economies, fostered the very first complex economies of humankind, and connected people around tables for millennia. So I couldn't believe that today it would be considered like another alcoholic beverage, And I've dedicated, out of 20 years in hospitality, I've dedicated 12 years of my industry experience to being a sommelier and to advocate for wine, find the best wines, delicious wines, make people happy, take care of them, work with the producers, with the farmers. And I'm like, what is all this work going to go? Am I just going to go and change industries now at 40 years old? So I started to think, I started to really look at wine, and I thought there was a structural issue. If it has survived all these years, I thought to myself, how do we make it culturally relevant today? I thought the structural issue was also that it has lost its connection. We have lost the connection to the stories of wine, that we have lost how to explain how wine links to a lot more than the product, history, culture, anthropology, philosophy, provenance, and I think somewhere along the way, we narrowed the conversation. And it's now reduced in its own silo, and the industry is talking to each other. And we've kind of we're in this existential crisis. So how does this work is bringing me here is one of the few things that inspired me along this journey was when I went to New Zealand last year. I was one of the scholars during the Pinot Noir Summit. And I was very lucky to be in the room with a bunch of other scholars and people from pretty much around the world that came to talk about the future of wine. It was during the Pinot Noir Summit. And I heard Jamie Good, a very famous wine writer, really well respected, probably the most credentialed person talking about regenerative practices in wine, give a talk on regenerative wines or regenerative practices in vineyard. That's when I had that light bulb moment when I'm like, it suddenly sort of gave me the answer I was searching for about why wine mattered. Because if you think about it, um, wine is the reason wine exists is because it is someone recording place, recording time. It gives you a sense of place. So when you say like you're drinking this wine, what makes this wine worth drinking is because it is translating the idea that a place would taste a certain way, but it's also the interpretation of the human that is actually observing this place to taste a certain way. Um, but then this sense of place that we talk, the taste, the actual flavor, have we ever really talked about why does it have this certain flavor? So for me, I thought like um, I saw the problem is that wine was actually disconnected with soil health, with the agricultural system that actually made wine possible. It just became either a commodity or it became a beverage you drank. You didn't even think that this actually came somewhere. How does that place that it came from is being taken care of? So I found that the new meaning that I like, my renewed love for wine came from the fact that I'm like, if wine actually was a way to, if drinking wine from responsible farming was a way to support people and farmers that are doing the good work for the planet, for I guess like making incredible wines that actually reflect the sense of place in its true form, in its most authentic form, then I want to be telling these stories. So this is where I guess in the last 2 years of me leaving full-time hospitality, I have found myself becoming a wine critic for Wine Pilot. I'm writing articles. I'm a freelance wine writer. I've traveled the last decade to Austria, which is a very, which is one of the countries, small wine country, but really big pioneer in regenerative viticulture. And I guess now I am very much committed and extremely excited to make people understand and make more informed decision on what wine to drink and why actually wine matter.
Wow, Liinaa. Yes, I mean, what a story. You've got so much expertise and experience in hospitality and, of course, thinking about wine all the time. And then to have this pivot point where a new way of thinking about it and talking about it was opened up for you must have been so thrilling and, yeah, actually life-changing. I mean, it's interesting, often I think for a long time we've had conversations about wine. And when I say conversations about wine, I'm really thinking about in restaurants because I'm not a wine expert at all, but I love, hearing from an engaging sommelier about what I'm drinking or thinking about drinking. And I suppose for a long time, you'd hear things like it's grown here, so you get the sea breeze or the salt air or the flintiness of the soil or whatever it is. But you're right, like that the actual way that the grapes, the vines are being farmed has not been a big part of the conversation. I just want to I suppose, catch people up a little bit because you're very steeped in this idea of regenerative agriculture, but perhaps for people who aren't thinking about this stuff, do you want to just explain what regenerative agriculture is?
Absolutely. I guess it's a good way to start. So I think like the consumer, the public, they've had a lot of things thrown at them. There was organic farming, biodynamic farming, and then there was a whole thing with natural wine, and now it's regenerative. It can be quite confusing, um, but I'll try to simplify it the most that I can. Is when you look at organic farming, it's basically telling you what you're not allowed to use: synthetic inputs, pesticides, herbicides, and this is just strict. And then you have the certification, which a lot of people don't have because it's very expensive to get them, but they try their best to stick to the organic principles. Now you've got biodynamic, which is a framework developed by Rudolf Steiner, including preparations, compost, working with seasonal and lunar calendar, and that basically a lot of growers have worked with those methods and have seen and I have like interviewed a lot of them, have seen a big change in the microbial soil health, in also how the flavor in the wines have become more complex across time. And now regenerative farming asks a very different question. Regenerative, as the word suggests, is to regenerate what is almost dying or depleted of life. So when you actually talk of regenerative viticulture, it is to actually sort of decrease monoculture, because when you look at like wine, we talk of winemaking, wine growing, a lot of it is just like sprawls of vineyards everywhere, but that is actually monoculture. Regenerative viticulture basically tell you that if you restore biodiversity within your vineyard, you are actually restoring the soil health. If the soil is healthy, the vine will be healthy. It all begins in the soil. So planting trees, legumes, brassicas, cover crops in between the rows. And it's basically when you go into a vineyard, you look at the vineyard, it's almost like we know how to taste wine. We give points to wine, but we don't know how to read a vineyard. And when you see a vineyard, when you see that it's actually like plants growing, trees growing, insects, bird, animals, this is what biodiversity is. And this is what regenerative farming is. It is to restore this, I guess, like the diversity that what nature is supposed to be operating within. And when you take all of these things out, and when you treat I guess wine growing as monoculture, then you are forced to use synthetic inputs. Then you are forced. Think about that. This is imagine this insect or this pest that you have to use pesticide. If you actually have a cover crop where this pest will actually go and attack this or eat this crop rather than the vine, then nature is taking care of that. You don't have to use this pesticide. So this is why like regenerative practices is to restore the diversity, the nature, and to strengthen nature, and then to be able to observe. And all you do as I guess it's a lot of work. Yes, it's expensive, and people say, it's not that easy, but it has to start somewhere. And one of the things that I've seen people do, and which is also very encouraging for regenerative practices, it's not a dogma. It's not about you're doing well, you're not doing well. It's not right or wrong. The great thing with regenerative practices, you can go straight from conventional farming to regeneration. You don't need to go for organic and biodynamic. So a lot of places I have seen who are custodians of farmers kids of wine growers who used to actually farm conventionally because they were not taught otherwise. These kids, they're like my age today. They are actually working regeneratively. They are doing the work, and I'm supporting their work. But I'm not going to be like just saying don't buy wines from them because they're farming conventionally. No, they started doing the work. So regenerative is very much an inclusive, it's a welcoming world to say you can start anytime, anywhere. The thing is start. Even if you start thinking about it, it is to start. It is like, this is what, like, if I guess, I hope I've answered your question, but this is really what, without simplifying it, is what regenerative practices is in the vineyard. And it also belongs to food and all that, which we'll get to later.
So I think, it's, I can feel, the excitement and energy for this other way of doing things, where it's about celebrating the many forms of life that can exist in an agricultural setting, not just the crop or crops that you might want to be focusing on. I'd love you to talk to us, Liinaa, about Avani, which is a vineyard on the Mornington Peninsula, out an hour from Melbourne. Shashi Singh is a previous guest on Dirty Linen, so we'll link to that chat in the show notes. But I mean, I know it's the middle of winter, but tell us about, the life that you see in the Avani vineyard, the complexity that you see and how perhaps that's different from a conventional vineyard.
Yes. Great question. I have followed her work for a long time, since I was a sommelier when I started in 2015 in Australia. One of the things when we talk of sense of place, I think Avani, Shashi she's doing exactly that. She has found her identity in the Australian landscape. So when you go to Avani in Mornington and you have this plot, which is actually the plot where she does the Syrah, she has planted, she was the first one to plant Syrah in otherwise a region known for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And everyone's like, you're crazy. Like, why are you planting Syrah here? It will never ripen. But it was almost a bit of a spot that was a bit too warm for Pinot. So when she took over the vineyard 20 years ago, she told me the vineyard was conventional farming. right? And she decided she's going to change this because she didn't want to work this way. It didn't feel natural for her. It didn't feel right. So she started like, doing organic farming, biodynamic. She was mentored by Philip Jones, who was the owner of Bass Phillips. There's a lot of like legacy there, and mentoring and observing and trying, and she did lots of things to be able to get to where she is, and that came through trial and error. So when you actually see Avani, for me, I see, especially her Syrah plot, you can see that there is no bare earth. It's covered with grass. There's like some cover crops in between the rows. There is also a multitude of different soil type as well that is coming from the top, which we have like the red soil of Red Hill up to like some silt down down the vineyard. What I love with Avani is the story that she has from the fact that she went into biodynamic and organic because where she grew up in the north of India, this is what basically the farmers in her family were doing. And, she made me laugh because when I said to her, what did your mom think when you came to Melbourne and, coming from different backgrounds, like she was I think she was a chemist. And, she started to farm vines because, like, for the Indian culture was like, that's strange, She's like, yeah, my mom actually said, you're going backwards. Why are you like, if you wanted to do that, you should have just stayed in India and, help us farm. But like she said, what I love with that is like she has always had an affinity with nature. And she found that for her, making wine was to express what nature was already gave her. It's not to force nature, it's not to impose on nature. And for me, this philosophy is a philosophy that I want to share. And that is that. And one of the things she said, I also was like, did you notice there was a change in the taste of the wine? Now, I don't say that regenerative farming makes better wine, because there's all sorts of things. You can have also wines that don't taste great. It's not just because some things from regenerative practices that they necessarily taste better, but there's the science is now there's more science to that suggests that the flavor is enhanced. I mean, think like I was there yesterday. One of the things we talked about was you were in the food world, Dani. How often have you actually tasted a vegetable or a fruit that comes from organic or from regenerative farm that tastes better than when you actually buy it from the supermarket shelf that is sprayed with toxic chemicals? Even the lifetime on the shelf of these products actually are much shorter in conventional farming than it is from natural sources. So why doesn't that actually include, like, why isn't that like actually something we think about grapes and the flavor? So I think, like, for me, this is Avani represent pretty much this ethos, but also she is extremely kind, and she does not come with criticism and binary views. And she says that this is very, very encouraging for other people that are working conventionally. Is like you are able to start. Like she started 20 years ago, and she's told me like the resilience that her grapes, even the fruit, the berries, everything, the complexity in her wine, she has witnessed that across those 20 years of working this way. And today, really, when I taste her wine yesterday, I was trying Avani. We tried the 2021 and we tried the 2023 Syrah. It is the benchmark for me of the cold climate Syrah. It is almost like a brooding Pinot, It's brambly. It's like there's life in it. It's a living wine, And the texture, the length, the tannins, everything is really well integrated. And also for Syrah, which is sometimes, the concept of Syrah or Shiraz for us is we often think of these big boys, big like extracted wines, but when you taste a wine, it's sort of like ethereal. And ethereal is is sometimes a word you would actually use for Pinot Noir description, but like I really get that with her Syrah. And even the shape of the wine, she told me like we barely talked of tasting note. We're just talking about the shape of the wine as well, on the palate and the length of the wine, the energy that the wine had. So yeah, that's very evocative.
That's an interesting word, Liinaa, the energy. I think because you're talking about a product that's coming from an environment that's more complex. It's not bare soil. It's been controlled with pesticides. It's being boosted by fertilizers. It's something that's definitely more related to where it's being grown. It's being impacted by a greater range of life forms that are existing in the same space and time with it. So it makes sense that it has that energy. It's interesting as you're talking, I'm sort of thinking, you did relate it to produce, to vegetables, for example. Wine is something that we're used to tasting in a subtle way. We're looking for the differences from year to year, from place to place, from variety to variety. I'd say it's not necessarily the same with mandarins or broccoli. We're less interested, or it's the terroir, the taste of the place has been less a conversation with vegetables. I think maybe with oysters, for example, with maybe more used to thinking about that distinction of place. But I feel like because we've got this language around wine, it's a really good way for people to start thinking about regenerative agriculture and the difference that it can make, because there is this tradition of differentiating one wine from another.
Yes, I think that yes, absolutely. Differentiating one wine to the other, because we are flooded with wine, and we're also flooded with a lot of very ordinary wines that are coming from bad farming. And I think like by educating and by making people more conscious of the provenance, the conditions in which this wine has been grown and this wine has been made, is going to really help people drink better. Especially in a climate where they're telling you that alcohol is not good for you. Like, I think if you were to drink wine, when you see responsible drinking takes a new form when you're drinking from responsible farming, as well as drinking moderately.
And I guess also just to, perhaps talk about some of the broader benefits of different ways of farming. So if you're farming with care for the soil by using fewer inputs, that soil then holds more carbon. It holds a greater diversity of life forms, so it boosts biodiversity. It can hold more water. So in times of great rains, soil that is more healthy can hold more water, therefore reduce the risk of floods in certain areas. It also holds more nutrients in dry times, so it can also sustain more life when there is a lack of rain. So I suppose when we're living in a time of climate crisis, it's not just about better tasting wine or not putting, chemicals into our own bodies. It's also, in a broader sense, better for all of us, for the world that we live in.
Exactly, and this is where I found the meaning in what I'm doing. Is what if like when we told people that you're drinking this wine, you are actually participating in you're participating in an agricultural. You're making an agricultural decision. Sorry, when you are deciding to drink a wine that's coming from these practices. Other than that, for me, is also the existentialism of wine, and why does it exist in today's culture, is, don't you think you feel better about drinking a wine coming from someone who's making it with care, with love, that's taking care of the planet, that's restoring like the soil, the health, restoring like bees, like flowers, like agroforestry, and all of these things that we talk about, teeming with, like, I'm reading a book at the moment called Teeming with Nutrients. Is basically explaining how there's a quorum sensing with the bacteria under the ground, and the more diverse they are, like all the root system, basically the mycorrhizal network that is working to actually give the plant food. And even like in drought season, for example, these microbes, they know there's a problem above because they get the signal, and they actually go and take stock of food and water back to the plant. So that's why a lot of like farmers also don't irrigate, don't feel the need that they need to irrigate, because they're letting nature actually basically taking care of that. And also the other big thing is cover crops. When there is cover crops on top of soil and there's no bare earth, the amount of heat that is refracted back into this atmosphere is is decreased by, I guess, planetary scale. So this is in a way kind of like reducing like global warming in a certain way, because when you think of all this land that is taken by viticulture, and a lot of them are actually very like driven by monoculture, there is definitely this aspect that a lot of heat is refracted from the soil. When I was in New Zealand, after listening to Jamie Good talk about regenerative practices, we went to Hawke's Bay. We were in Gimlet Gravel at Steve and at Smith and Chef, and Steve basically was showing us two different samples of soil. And there was a soil that came from a conventional farming, and it was basically dust coming off, like, it was the wind was blowing it. And when you talk about soil erosion, this is basically it. Whereas there was the soil that was from regenerative vineyard that was actually that was humid, that was keeping the earth much cooler. When we were touching the temperature, it was much cooler, and you could see that this was like just like living. And this is what you, if this is actually the soil where your vine is being planted, surely it has an effect on the flavor. Surely it has an effect on I guess like not sustainability, but like it will have an effect on conserving the planet in a way. So you are drinking a wine from a human being that actually is taking care of the planet. I want to drink this wine.
Liinaa, it's great to think about buying wine from a person, and especially from a person who is looking after the soil and, in a way that has these ancillary benefits for the planet that we all share. But wine is also made in a business environment, and there are often big corporations that own a lot of the wine labels, own the stores. There's a lot of vertical integration in the wine industry where, the same person that makes the wine sells the wine, and perhaps they sell it under a number of different labels. What are some of the things that you're seeing in this space?
This is actually the contradiction that I think is happening in the wine world at the moment. We're seeing that there's a declining consumption of wine, but at the same time, there's an oversupply of wine. The thing is, like a lot of the recently, there's been an announcement from a group called Endeavour Group that owns actually BWS and Dan Murphy, but they also own 350 hotels, pubs around Australia. So when you put that together, that's like 2,000 entry points or touch points that Australian encounter wine, and a lot of them are encountering wine for the first time. So what they've decided is to let go of some of the assets, the production, the vineyard, and now they're going to 99% of flexible sourcing. And recently, like a couple of weeks ago, they've actually also let go of they're putting on the market Oak Ridge. We knew that, but they're keeping Chapel Hill, the brand, but without the vineyard. So that's another big thing of provenance. If provenance is tied to the vineyard, but then you're keeping the name without the vineyard, what does that actually mean for the wine?
Liinaa, I just want to, let me just pause there because that is so important. I want to make sure people understand that. So Chapel Hill is a, storied wine label. That wine comes from somewhere. It comes from a place. The company has kept the label but divorced itself from the land. So you keep the name, but you don't keep the provenance. It's the opposite of what you're talking about, with Avani, and it's like, the person who grows the wine right there, sells it, labels it, sends it to market. This is just such a gross disconnection of place and product.
Yes, it is almost like sense of place meets like sense of convenience, because the whole point is like we're trying to find this identity that the land is, that is this custodianship. And the other thing that I've learned with like New Zealand is whakapapa, is a lineage. It is actually the connection that us human we have with the land. And now what you're telling me, you're actually divorcing the wine from the land by actually not having the vineyard and only keeping the production and flexible sourcing, which is basically you're sourcing the grapes, bulk grapes from wherever, to then pay a marketing team rather than to pay a custodian who spent 20 years, like Dave Bignell at Oak Ridge, who has spent 20 years to actually learn this vineyard, this place, who's making one of like the most expressive Chardonnays in Australia, to basically let him go and pay a marketing team to basically do branded commodity and discounted wines. And one of the things that's really important in this is that people drink these wines not realizing that it comes at a cost. It's not a benefit to them. Drinking discounted wines is definitely not a benefit to you. You might be saving a bit of money, you think. But this is really healthy? Did you actually think that? I mean, like, I don't want to talk healthy and alcohol, but at the same time, where you're choosing your poison, be more mindful about where it comes from, because you're not supporting Australian farmers. You're not supporting Australian producers. Dan Murphy has pretty much existed for all these years thanks to the wine industry. And now it's turning around and it's going to basically source wine, make wine without any vineyard on it. It's almost like you're reading a book written by no one. Would you do that? Would you? There's no authors. There's no accountability. So I guess people are, how am I going to explain this? It's just it triggers me, because when I was working, there's certain places where I worked, for example, and you talk about this business thing. There was procurement. Procurement, what it means is basically a lot of the wines that were decided to be poured by the glass were decided by someone in an office on an armchair, not someone who has actually the wine expertise. That person would make a decision based on rebates, discounts. And I don't know if they were invited somewhere or not. I don't know. But the thing is, this wine was being poured for 6 months, and it was some Riesling. And I tasted the wine. I didn't make the decision, but I had to actually pour it. And as a sommelier, it really annoyed me, because this was poured across many venues of the group that I worked at. And when I tasted the wine, it was a watered down Riesling. It was just with added acid. It just didn't have any length. I'm not saying that these guys make this kind of wine, but surely when there's discounts, there's no I guess there's no commitment to land, to saving that, to biodiversity. There's no you think that if the bottom line is at the back of their mind, do you think they're going to care about farming? Do you think they're going to care about the actual people? This is where I guess I'm triggered with this, because what is happening now with all these restructuring is that they keep creating soulless wine in a market where we're already flooded by wine that are not actually fit for drinking if you have taste. And we're not look, don't treat the consumer as dumb. People are not dumb. We're not stupid. And the thing is, you keep giving people this kind of wine, and you keep making this kind of wine. And on the shelves, rather than actually giving the space on the shelf, you've got the retail power to actually feed people wine and to give them a good time. And instead of actually putting good wine made by good people from good farming on those shelves, you're just filling it up with branded commodity. And there's absolutely there's no story in this wine. There's no, yeah.
And I think, Liinaa, that's counterproductive in the end, because if people are already drinking less wine and you're serving them shit wine when they do drink it, you're not creating the next generation of wine drinkers. You're giving people, an excuse to have another glass of water.
Yeah, that's the contradiction. It's that, exactly. That's the contradiction. That's exactly what I mean when you're now is the time to actually make sense. Give a reason for people to go to wine. Give them flavor. Give them story. And all these small producers. I've spoken to some of the small producers. They say, I'm not really affected by what Endeavour Group is doing, but at the same time, I think the ripple effect will be felt, because when your wine is not on the shelves on 2,000 entry point where wine can be sold to the Australian public, then I think that actually can affect you down the track. And I think that also taking up space, soulless wine taking up space is a problem.
It makes me think of dairy, for example, or wheat, anything that you could think about, or coffee, any product, agricultural product grown by people, that just becomes an anonymous, aggregated commodity that's turned into an industrial food or drink. You disconnect the consumer from the source of their food, from the people that made it possible to have that food or that drink. I think for the people that are producing it, there's just definitely a sort of psychological drain. You're a price taker, you have less power, you have less opportunity to tell your own story, and it contributes to a diminishing of the industry as a whole. And I would say, like take it to the end point. It makes our lives worse. It makes the people who are making it, it makes their lives worse. The people who are consuming it, it makes their lives worse. I don't really see a benefit except perhaps for shareholders, which I guess, is all of us, at least in our super, if not directly as investors. But it really makes you feel cut out of helping create the world that you want to live in. So, Liinaa, let's take a bit of the power back. I'm just a wine drinker. What can I do to change this situation?
If you're a wine drinker, you need to support independent shops. I know everyone's saying that. What is that? Don't go to the big conglomerates. And when you buy also online, don't just buy because wine is cheap. When a wine is sold on the basis of cheap, that's not the wine you want to drink. You want to drink a wine that is sold on the basis of the story, on the basis of flavor. That, saying that the wine comes from, a certain region is not enough. Like, you gotta ask when you go into a bottle shop. Don't just ask the tasting note. Don't just ask the score of the wine, because a lot of the times that is also another issue. Wine critics are scoring wine without knowing where it's coming from. They're scoring. They know where it's coming from. Like, it is McLaren Vale, for example. They know the vineyard. If they're doing it blind in wine shows, they might not know. What I'm saying is that if you go into a place, it's not about the taste, it's about why it tastes this way. Ask them about the way it's farmed. You don't need to interview the poor retail guy, but just ask them, I would like to actually buy something that's coming from, whether it's organic, it doesn't have to be organic, but you say, I want it to be farmed responsibly. Tell me the story of the person who's making it. As long as there's no name behind the label, you don't buy it. That's for me. If there is no actual, if it's just a branded thing and it exists as just like a label and there's no human behind that, don't drink it. And you know what? We've got ChatGPT, we've got information at our fingertips now. Just look it up, take a photo, look it up. If you don't want to ask the person, if there's no story behind this wine, then I can tell you you're not doing yourself any favor by drinking this wine. And the other thing I like people to know is sometimes we make a big decision whether we're going to spend $5 more or not. It's worth actually sometimes spending that $5 more, because that $5 more, what I have noticed is I worked actually at the South Melbourne market for 6 months in the bottle shop there, and I've made people who were just strictly on I just want to spend $20 today, spend 26, and they've come back and they said, thank you so much. Because in that $6, the quality is just jumping hugely, so that's also about you get what you pay for. And I guess also when we talk about the Endeavour Group, we talk about farming, we talk about branded commodity. When wines are being made with no intention for responsibility and accountability to the land, they don't really care about the taste neither. And so many people are encountering wine that are actually tasting quite really not actually tasty, and they think this is Cabernet. They drink this and they're like, this is Cabernet. And I'm like, no, this is not how Cabernet tastes. Here's the wine. Here, if you were to actually just spend a little bit more, you would taste a really good Cabernet. But also, it doesn't have to be all about expensive and all that. Wine should be accessible. But I guess people that want to spend $8 on a bottle of wine, look, they're not really the people that I'm going to try to explain regenerative practices to. But what I want to say, if you have a budget of $20 and you care about what you're putting in your body, then please do ask who's making the wine. That is the base, the simplest thing you could do is asking who makes the wine.
So I guess I would think of it as, how I think about meat. It's like eat less meat, eat better meat. It could be thought of like that. So we understand that people may only have a certain amount of money to spend, or, wine is a special treat. Of course, they're watching their budgets, but there are ways of doing that, and thinking about who you can support with your dollar. Liinaa, we could talk for days about this stuff. There's so much to cover, and it's such a huge topic. But I just love to finish with something beautiful. Can you tell me about a beautiful experience you've had in, whether it's in a restaurant or drinking a wine recently? Tell us about something that, helps you fall back in love with what you do.
Yes. Actually, this was the best experience I've ever had, and I don't think anything would ever top it. It was in a restaurant called Mugaritz. It is in San Sebastian in Spain, and that was in about 2017 that I went there. They actually open only half the year, because they take the other half of the year to craft an entirely new concept, an entirely new menu. I went there with my best friend, and we were doing actually a whole trip into Spain. We were going to see Priorat, we were going to Barcelona, we went to Rioja, and obviously, a lot of the Michelin-starred restaurants there. And San Sebastian is really like the epicenter of that. What really was one of the most incredible things at Mugaritz was the wine pairing. It was not just a wine pairing, it was a beverage pairing that was just extraordinary. Literally, like, I've been to a lot of restaurants, like 20 years in hospitality. That's what we do when we have time off. We go for research and development, research purposes, and yet just to, learn from others, but also just to enjoy what we actually do for a living, but to be on the other side of it. One of the best things, I think, was the pairing that we had with a dessert. We were offered 10 decades of Chateau Yquem. And the sommelier basically explained these decades as what has happened in the evolution of human history, about all the wars that had happened as well. And as we were tasting these 10 decades of Chateau Yquem, it was the flavor. It was, wow, that bottle was made when those things was happening. That's incredible. That is why, wine captures basically the time. It captures the essence. It captures all the stories. It's basically locked into a bottle that when you actually open it, all the stories are unlocked. And the storytelling that the sommelier was doing, it was obviously, again, not about tasting note. It was telling us about this wine as if it was a cultural artifact, And there was another pairing. I had 4 decades of a rosé from Vina Tondonia, and this rosé was the oldest was from 1970s. I don't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was 1972, and the color was definitely going on quite amber. It was quite dark, and I'm like, is that rosé even going to still we think rosé is something pink and you drink it poolside, whatever. This rosé was the best. Was the oldest I've had. And I couldn't believe how. And then I had the 80s, the 90s, and into the early noughties. One of each, and I couldn't believe how the acidity was still there. The taste was a lot really complex, layers and layers and layers in this rosé. And finally, the last one we had in the pairing, it was the crazy amount of wines we tried, was with the chocolate fountain. That was a 1728 Jerez, that the oldest, I guess, wine that I've had, with all different types of chocolate and cocoa and different concentration of cocoa. So that was, yeah. That's why I love what I do. Yeah.
Wow, Liinaa. It's amazing to hear you describe it, and it's also amazing that you remember it so well. So well done. I'd love to continue this conversation. So much important stuff that you've raised and pointed to, and some great tips for us as drinkers that we can also change the world in the way that we drink our wine. Liinaa, thank you so much for being on Dirty Linen today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dani.
This is Dirty Linen. I'm Dani Valent. We bring you untold stories from the food world. Real, raw, unafraid, hopeful. We're driven by a belief that food provides endless opportunities for learning, connecting, and creating the world we want to live in. Delicious, open-hearted, meaningful. If you know a story that needs telling, get in touch. Write to dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au. Thank you for listening.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.